He was issued the rifle like everyone else. Same metal, same weight, same expectation. Hold the line. Follow orders. Fire when told. His name was Matthias Krüger, Wehrmacht rifleman, who had learned early that war didn't ask who you were. It only demanded what you could do. He had been a teacher before the war. Not a great one, not a famous one. Just a quiet man who taught boys how to write their names and read history. They would one day be forced to live. Now, those same boys were soldiers beside him. His trench smelled of wet earth and fear. Across the field, enemy positions were hidden by smoke and shattered trees. The world had become gray. Gray skies, gray faces, gray morality. The officer's voice cut through the chaos. Fire! Rifles cracked like thunder. Men shouted. Bodies dropped in the distance. Matthias raised his rifle like the others. He aimed. His finger rested on the trigger. And then he saw someone through the sights. A figure running, not charging, not attacking, running away. The man wasn't much older than Matthias's students used to be. Maybe 18, maybe less. For a second, their eyes met across impossible distance. Matthias froze. His finger refused to move. The rifle shook in his hands. "Krüger!" a soldier yelled. "Shoot!" Matthias could not, because in that single moment, war stopped being a duty. It became a choice. And he realized something terrifying. If he pulled the trigger, it wouldn't be a battlefield kill. It would be murder he would carry forever. The boy disappeared into smoke. Matthias lowered his rifle slowly, like a man placing down a weapon that had become a curse. Nobody noticed at first. War is loud enough to hide a single act of mercy. But mercy in war is dangerous, because once you refuse to fire once, you might never be able to fire again. And in an army, a rifleman who won't shoot is not useless. He is suspicious, a threat, not to the enemy, to the people standing beside him. End of chapter 1. Matthias thought the smoke had protected him. He thought the chaos had swallowed his hesitation. But war doesn't just measure bullets. It measures behavior. That night, the trench was quiet. Too quiet. Only the distant rumble of artillery echoed like a storm that refused to arrive. The men sat in wet uniforms, chewing stale bread, staring at nothing. Silence after battle always felt heavier than the battle itself. Matthias cleaned his rifle slowly, mechanically. Not because he needed to, because busy hands looked normal. Across from him sat Hagen Richter, a corporal with tired eyes and a mouth that rarely smiled. Hagen had been in the war longer than most. He had survived too much to believe in accidents. Hagen watched Matthias the way hunters watch movement in tall grass. Finally, he spoke. "You didn't fire today." Matthias's hands paused for half a second. He forced them to keep moving. "I did," Matthias lied. Hagen nodded, not convinced. "I was right beside you," he said quietly. "I heard everyone's rifle. Even the new boy fired. But yours—" He leaned forward slightly. "Your rifle stayed silent." Matthias felt his throat tighten. In the distance, someone laughed softly at a joke. Another man coughed. The world kept breathing around them, unaware that Matthias's entire life was balancing on a single conversation. "I jammed," Matthias said. It was the first excuse that came. Hagen didn't laugh. He didn't argue. He simply stared. "A jam?" Hagen repeated. "In the one moment the officer was watching?" Matthias looked down at the rifle. It was clean, perfect, ready. The lie tasted sour. Hagen's voice became softer. "Listen to me," he said. "If you're scared, say that. Everyone is scared." Matthias swallowed. This wasn't kindness. This was a warning wrapped in human words. Because fear was acceptable. Refusal was not. "I'm fine," Matthias said. Hagen nodded slowly. Then he did something Matthias didn't expect. He pulled out a cigarette, offered it. Matthias took it with shaking fingers. Hagen lit it for him. The flame illuminated Hagen's face. Hard lines, hollow cheeks, eyes that had seen too much death to be surprised by anything anymore. "Do you know what they do to men who won't fire?" Hagen asked calmly. Matthias didn't respond. Hagen continued anyway. "They don't call it cowardice. Cowards can still be useful. They call it sabotage." Matthias felt cold even under his coat. Hagen leaned back. "I'm not your enemy, Krüger, but if the lieutenant finds out, I won't be able to protect you." Protect you. That word shook Matthias more than the threat itself, because Matthias didn't want protection. He wanted his mind to stop seeing faces. He wanted his finger to stop refusing. He wanted to be normal again. But there was no normal. Not here. The next morning, orders arrived. A patrol mission. Not a large assault. Not a battle. Something worse. A quiet mission where there would be no smoke to hide behind. 5 men were chosen. Matthias was one of them. Hagen was the squad lead. As they prepared to leave, Hagen pulled Matthias aside. He spoke without anger, without emotion. "Out there," Hagen said, "you'll get one chance to prove you're one of us." Matthias stared at him. "You mean, prove I can kill?" Hagen's expression didn't change. "I mean, prove you won't get us killed." Matthias understood then. This was no longer about enemy targets. This was about trust. And in war, trust was life. They moved through the forest just after dawn. Everything was wet, quiet, breathing. Matthias listened to every branch snap under boots. Every rustle of leaves sounded like an enemy moving closer. He watched Hagen's hands, steady, comfortably violent, as if war was an old job he had accepted long ago. Then they saw movement ahead, a figure near a tree line, alone, unarmed. Maybe a scout, maybe a farmer, maybe a child. Matthias lifted his rifle. His heart slammed. Hagen whispered, "Take him." Matthias aimed. Through the sights, he saw the man clearly now. Thin, dirty clothes, hands raised, not attacking, not even running, just surrendering. Matthias's finger froze again. The same invisible wall. The same unbearable feeling. Hagen watched him. Matthias felt Hagen's gaze like a gun pressed against his head. "Krüger," Hagen whispered, voice deadly calm. "Shoot." Matthias couldn't. And he knew, in that moment, the war was no longer his biggest threat. The men beside him were. Matthias stood frozen with his rifle raised. The surrendering man ahead had his hands up, trembling. Mud clung to his clothes. His face was pale, not with defiance but with terror. He didn't look like an enemy. He looked like someone who wanted to live. Hagen's whisper cut through the morning air like a blade. "Shoot." Matthias's finger refused again. It felt like his body had betrayed him. Or maybe his body was the only part of him still human. The man's eyes locked onto Matthias, not begging with words, begging with existence. Matthias's heart hammered so hard he thought the whole forest could hear it. Hagen stepped closer. "You're hesitating," Hagen murmured. "Do you want him to scream? To run? To alert others?" Matthias swallowed. The surrendering man was shaking so badly his arms looked ready to collapse. "Please," the man whispered in broken German. "No." Matthias flinched. He understood every syllable, and that made it worse. Hagen's face hardened. In one fast motion, he pushed Matthias's rifle barrel downward and fired himself. A single gunshot echoed. The surrendering man dropped into the mud like a puppet whose strings were cut. Silence returned instantly. Matthias didn't move. His hands were still on the rifle, but it no longer felt like a weapon. It felt like a curse. Hagen looked at Matthias with a stare colder than winter. "You see?" he said quietly. "It takes 1 second." Matthias stared at the body. He didn't feel relief. He felt sick, because Hagen had fired the shot. But Matthias still felt responsible for the death, because he had been the one ordered to do it. He had been the one who could have stopped time. But time didn't stop. It never does. Back at the line, the patrol returned before noon. No one celebrated. No one spoke. When they stepped into the trench area, the lieutenant looked up from his map table. He noticed something immediately. Not the missing prisoner, not the mud, not even the tired faces. He noticed Matthias, because Matthias looked wrong, eyes unfocused, jaw tight, hands too still. "Report," the lieutenant demanded. Hagen spoke smoothly. "Contact made. Threat removed. No losses." The lieutenant nodded. Then his eyes returned to Matthias. "You fired?" he asked sharply. Matthias felt his throat close. Hagen answered before Matthias could. "I handled it," Hagen said calmly. The lieutenant's eyebrows tightened. "That wasn't your order, Corporal. Krüger is rifleman." A pause. A heavy pause. Then Hagen said, "His weapon malfunctioned." Matthias's stomach twisted. The same lie. Again, the lieutenant stepped closer, face stiff with irritation. "Krüger, is this true?" Matthias looked at Hagen, then at the lieutenant, then at the men watching from the trench. Dozens of eyes. The kind that don't forget weakness. He forced himself to nod. "Yes, sir." The lieutenant stared at him for a long moment. Then he said something that made Matthias feel colder than the front wind. "Malfunctions happen once." He leaned closer. "They don't happen twice." The punishment that didn't look like punishment. That evening, Matthias was assigned to guard duty, not because they trusted him, because they wanted him visible, because they wanted him watched. Guard duty was where mistakes became accidents. A shovel slipped. A bullet discharged. A man fell into a trench and broke his neck. War had many quiet ways of deleting inconvenient soldiers. Matthias sat at the edge of the post, staring into the dark. A flare rose in the distance, bathing the battlefield in pale light for a second. In that flash, Matthias saw the dead man again. Hands raised, begging, then falling. Matthias pressed his forehead into his palms. He whispered, "I didn't want this." No one answered. The wind didn't care. The visit. Near midnight, the lieutenant came. Alone. No shouting. No anger. That was worse. He stood beside Matthias and lit a cigarette. The flame revealed the officer's face. Tired, sharp, impatient. "You were a teacher before the war," the lieutenant said. Matthias's blood froze. How did he know? The lieutenant exhaled smoke. "I read your file. You're educated, not stupid." He looked at Matthias's rifle. "So tell me something, Krüger." His voice lowered. "Are you refusing to shoot? Or are you incapable of it?" Matthias didn't speak, because the truth would kill him either way. The lieutenant's tone turned colder. "In my unit, hesitation spreads like disease." He pointed toward the darkness where enemy lines hid. "That out there is simple. Them or us." Then he pointed to the trench behind them. "And this in here is also simple. Loyalty or removal." Matthias's breathing tightened. The lieutenant leaned closer. "You will fire next time. Not a request. A sentence. If you don't," he whispered, "the enemy won't be the one to end you." Then he turned and walked away. The inner war. Matthias sat alone until sunrise. His rifle rested on his lap like a sleeping animal. He stared at it as if it belonged to someone else. He had survived battle. He had survived patrols. He had survived hunger and cold. But now he understood the real war wasn't in the field. It was inside him. A war between conscience and survival, between humanity and obedience. And in this war, there were no medals, only consequences. The next battle didn't begin with artillery. It began with footsteps, quiet, fast, urgent footsteps on broken stone. The unit had been ordered to clear a ruined building near the edge of a shattered village, the kind of place where walls still stood but life didn't, a place where shadows moved like living things. Matthias Krüger entered last, not because he was brave, because no one trusted him at the front. Hagen walked ahead, rifle ready, eyes sharp. The lieutenant stayed close behind. Too close. Matthias felt it. This wasn't just a mission, it was an exam. Inside the building, the air smelled like dust, mold, and old smoke. Every step echoed. Every breath sounded too loud. Somewhere in the distance, a piece of glass cracked under someone's boot. Matthias froze. Hagen signaled stop. Then, gunfire. A burst from the upper floor. One of their men dropped instantly, blood splashing across gray stone. Another screamed and crawled behind a broken wall. Chaos erupted. Men fired blindly into the dark. Shouts bounced through the ruins. Matthias pressed his back to a pillar, heart slamming, rifle in his hands, heavy and useless. The lieutenant shouted at him, "Move!" Matthias moved, not because of orders, because standing still was death. He climbed a staircase half collapsed by bombs, stepping over bricks and ash. His boots slipped once, and his stomach turned as he caught himself. At the top floor, smoke hung thick. He turned a corner and saw him, an enemy soldier, only a few meters away, close enough to see his eyes, close enough to hear his breathing. The soldier was young, dirt on his face, hands shaking, rifle raised but trembling like it weighed 100 pounds. Both men froze. For one impossible second, the war stopped. Matthias stared into the soldier's eyes and saw something that didn't belong on a battlefield. Fear exactly like his own. Not hatred, not aggression. Pure survival panic. The enemy soldier whispered something Matthias didn't understand, but he understood the meaning anyway. "I don't want to die." Matthias raised his rifle. The sight lined up with the soldier's chest. The trigger waited, and Matthias's entire body refused again. Behind him, boots stomped up the stairs. The lieutenant's voice exploded. "Krüger, fire!" Matthias's hands shook violently. The enemy soldier's finger tightened on his trigger. Both men were trapped inside the same decision. Shoot or be shot. Matthias's mouth opened. He didn't scream. He didn't plead. He said one word, so quiet it barely existed. "Go." The enemy soldier blinked, confused. Then Matthias stepped slightly to the side, opening a clear path toward a broken window and the collapsed roof beyond. The soldier hesitated. Then he lowered his rifle and ran. Gunfire erupted behind Matthias. The lieutenant fired past him, bullets smashing into the wall where the enemy had been standing. The soldier escaped into smoke. Matthias turned slowly. The lieutenant grabbed him by the collar and slammed him against the wall so hard. Matthias's teeth clicked. "You let him go," the lieutenant hissed. Matthias couldn't deny it. He didn't even try. "I couldn't," Matthias whispered. The lieutenant's eyes widened, half rage, half disbelief. "You couldn't?" He repeated like the words were insanity. "You think war cares about what you can't do?" Matthias's breath was shaking. "He wasn't attacking," Matthias said. He was the enemy!" The lieutenant roared. Men around them stared. Hagen's face was unreadable. The lieutenant lowered his voice suddenly, dangerous calm returning. "You've just proved it," he said softly. "You are not a soldier." Matthias swallowed. "Then what am I?" he asked quietly. The lieutenant leaned close, voice like ice. "A risk." Then he stepped back and barked orders to continue clearing the building. But Matthias knew the truth now. The real battle wasn't happening inside ruined villages. It was happening inside his own unit, and he had just crossed a line he couldn't uncross. Because refusing to fire once was hesitation. Refusing to fire twice was rebellion. Matthias didn't get punished immediately. That was the terrifying part. In war, quick punishment is mercy. Delayed punishment is a decision being prepared. After the ruined building mission, the unit returned with fewer men and more silence. Nobody spoke about the enemy soldier who escaped, but everyone felt it, like smoke trapped in lungs. Matthias cleaned his rifle that night with hands that wouldn't stop trembling, not because he wanted to use it, because cleaning looked loyal, because obedience could be performed like theater. Across the bunker, Hagen watched him without speaking, not angry, not friendly, measuring the summons. Just after midnight, 2 soldiers appeared beside Matthias. "Lieutenant wants you." No shouting, no accusation, just that simple sentence. Matthias stood up slowly, as if moving too fast might trigger execution. They escorted him through narrow trenches toward a small bunker, lit by one weak lantern. Inside, the lieutenant sat at a table with 2 other officers, a folded map, a cup of black coffee, a quiet atmosphere that felt like a courtroom without a judge. The lieutenant didn't offer a chair. "Krüger," he said, calm and cold, "do you understand what you did today?" Matthias swallowed. "I didn't fire," he admitted. One officer raised an eyebrow like Matthias had confessed to madness. The lieutenant leaned forward. "You didn't just refuse an order," he said. "You endangered the unit." Matthias's voice came out low. He was running. It wasn't necessary. The lieutenant's lips tightened. "Necessary?" he repeated. "You want to decide what's necessary now?" Matthias felt sweat under his collar. "I'm saying—" The lieutenant cut him off. "In this army, conscience is not a weapon we carry." Then came the words Matthias feared most. "You have made men doubt you." The true crime. Matthias realized the truth. They weren't punishing him because he spared an enemy. They were punishing him because he proved there was another way. A dangerous idea. If one soldier can refuse, what stops others? The lieutenant stood and walked around Matthias slowly, like inspecting defective equipment. "You were a teacher," he said quietly. "You believe in right and wrong." Matthias didn't respond. The lieutenant stopped behind him. "Right and wrong ended the day this war began." Matthias turned his head slightly. "So we become animals?" he whispered. One officer scoffed. The lieutenant's voice sharpened. "We become survivors." The choice. The lieutenant nodded toward the corner of the bunker. A prisoner sat on the floor, hands tied, face bruised. Matthias hadn't even noticed him at first. The prisoner was young, about the same age as the soldier Matthias had spared. His breathing was shallow. His eyes watched Matthias like a trapped animal watches the hunter. The lieutenant spoke softly, like giving a simple task. "Take your rifle." Matthias stared. "Sir?" The lieutenant stepped closer. "You want to be seen as loyal again?" he asked. "Then prove you are." Matthias's heart began to pound. "No," he whispered. One officer leaned back, amused. The lieutenant's expression didn't change. "Kill him." The words dropped into the bunker like a stone into deep water. Matthias felt sick. The prisoner shook his head desperately, muffled noises escaping his throat. Matthias looked at the officers. 3 men with power. 3 men who had stopped seeing humans. He turned back to the prisoner. This wasn't battle. This wasn't chaos. This was execution as discipline. Matthias's hands slowly lifted his rifle, not to aim, just to hold. His arms felt heavy, as if the rifle weighed as much as guilt. The lieutenant watched closely. The whole room watched, waiting to see if Matthias would finally become what they needed. Matthias's throat tightened. He couldn't do it. He lowered the rifle. "I can't," he said again, clearer this time. The lieutenant nodded, almost satisfied. "Then you have chosen." Matthias's breathing quickened. "What happens now?" The lieutenant stepped closer, voice quiet and deadly. "You will not infect my unit with hesitation." He looked toward the guards. "Take him." Matthias froze. "Sir." The lieutenant turned away like the decision was already finished. "Tomorrow," he said calmly, "you will be transferred. Penal detail. Mine clearing. Mine clearing." Everyone knew what that meant. Not a mission. A death sentence stretched over a few hours. Matthias felt his legs weaken. He wasn't being executed in the bunker. He was being sent to die slowly where no one would feel responsible. As he was dragged out, Matthias heard one last thing. A single gunshot behind him. The prisoner went silent. Matthias flinched. Even now, even after refusing, someone still died. And the worst part? The officers would sleep peacefully tonight, because in their minds, order had been restored. Hagen's eyes. Outside, the trench air hit Matthias like cold water. Hagen stood waiting in the shadows. He didn't smile. He didn't comfort. He only said one sentence. "You shouldn't have said, 'I can't.'" Matthias stared at him. "What should I have said?" Hagen looked away. "Nothing." Then he walked off, leaving Matthias alone under a sky that didn't care about morality. Matthias returned to his dugout that night. He stared at his rifle. He didn't touch it. Tomorrow he would walk into a minefield for refusing to kill. And he understood the final truth of his unit. They didn't fear the enemy. They feared doubt, because doubt breaks armies faster than bullets. Morning arrived like a punishment. Gray sky, cold wind, mud that swallowed boots like the earth wanted bodies. Matthias Krüger stood at the edge of an open field, holding a mine detector that looked more like a cruel joke than a tool. A thin metal frame, a small box that buzzed, a stick in his hands, and behind him, his unit, rifles pointed forward, not at the enemy, at him. The lieutenant stood with arms crossed, calm as a man watching a task being completed. "This is simple," the lieutenant said. "You walk. You listen. If it buzzes, you stop." He paused. "If you don't stop, you disappear." Matthias stared at the field. No visible mines, no markers, no mercy, just grass, mud, and death buried beneath. He tightened his grip, not because he was ready, because he refused to fall apart in front of them. Hagen stood in the line behind the lieutenant, face unreadable. Their eyes met for a second. No sympathy, no hatred, only the truth. This is what happens to men who hesitate. Step 1. Matthias took his first step forward. The mine detector stayed silent. Step 2. Silent. Step 3. His heart hammered. Every footfall felt like a question. Will the earth accept you, or explode you? Behind him, he heard the unit's boots shifting, men adjusting their grips, watching, waiting. Some wanted him to live, because his death would be ugly to witness. Some wanted him to die, because his death would make them feel safer about their own obedience. Matthias understood that war didn't just create enemies, it created audiences. The buzz. On the 7th step, the device buzzed, a sharp electric sound. Matthias froze instantly. The world stopped moving. Even the wind felt like it paused. The lieutenant shouted, "Mark it!" Matthias knelt carefully, hands shaking, and placed a small flag in the mud. His fingers were numb, not from cold, from the reality that death was inches below him. He stood again slowly. Sweat slid down his neck despite the cold air. He moved around the marked spot. One wrong move would tear him apart, and everyone behind him would keep walking anyway. The thought that wouldn't leave. As he walked, one thought repeated endlessly. This is their mercy. They didn't shoot you in the bunker. They made you do it yourself. Mine clearing wasn't punishment. It was execution made polite. The boy behind him, a younger soldier behind the line, whispered to another, "Why are we doing this to him?" The other replied quietly, "Because he reminded us we still have a choice." Matthias heard it, and it hit him harder than the buzz. They feared him because he proved morality still existed. That made them feel weak. So they had to erase him. The second buzz. The detector buzzed again. This time the sound was longer, stronger. Matthias froze, but his foot was already slightly forward, half weight on the ground, half weight still in air. He couldn't pull back too fast. He couldn't shift forward too fast. He held still, perfectly still, like a statue in the rain. His breath became thin, silent. Slowly, slowly, he moved his foot back the exact way it came. The buzz stopped. Matthias exhaled softly. Behind him, someone muttered, "Lucky." Matthias wanted to laugh. Luck had nothing to do with this. Only precision, only suffering. Hagen breaks formation. Then something happened that Matthias didn't expect. Hagen stepped out of line. The lieutenant barked, "Richter, back!" Hagen ignored him. He walked forward a few meters, stopping well behind Matthias. Far enough not to trip a mine, close enough to be seen. Matthias didn't turn. He could feel Hagen's presence like heat. Hagen spoke quietly. Not for the lieutenant. Only for Matthias. "Keep your steps narrow," Hagen said. "Don't widen your stance. Mines are placed in patterns." Matthias felt his throat tighten. Hagen was helping him. Not openly, not heroically, but helping, and that small act felt dangerous. The lieutenant shouted again, "Richter! Back now!" Hagen stepped backward, returning to line like nothing happened. But Matthias had heard it. A message hidden inside instructions. "I don't want you to die." Or maybe, "I don't want to watch you die." Matthias didn't know which was true. The explosion. The next buzz came suddenly. Matthias froze again, marked it, moved around. The unit followed carefully behind, stepping exactly in his footprints. Matthias was their shield, their sacrifice. Then it happened. A soldier behind them panicked. He stepped slightly off path, just slightly. A tiny mistake. A careless foot. A loud click. Matthias turned his head. Slowly, painfully, just enough to see it. The soldier's face turned white. No! Boom! The explosion tore the field open. Mud and blood sprayed the air. A piece of helmet landed near Matthias's feet. The unit screamed. Men ducked. Someone vomited. The lieutenant shouted orders, trying to control panic like a man trying to control fire with his bare hands. Matthias stood frozen, not from fear, from the final truth slamming into him. Even obedience doesn't guarantee survival. Even following the rules ends in pieces. The soldier was gone. Not dead. Gone. Erased. Matthias stared at the crater, and in that crater he saw the entire war. Pointless. Brutal. Hungry. Unforgiving. The lieutenant's face. The lieutenant looked at Matthias with cold eyes. "Keep moving," he ordered. Matthias blinked slowly. He wanted to scream. He wanted to throw the mine detector into the mud and walk away. But he knew what would happen. They would shoot him, and someone else would walk in his place. Matthias stepped forward again. One foot, then another. He walked because stopping changed nothing. And that was the cruelest lesson of all. As fog thickened around the minefield, Matthias realized he wasn't clearing mines anymore. He was clearing the last pieces of his own hope. Because after today, whether he lived or died, he would never be the same man again. That night, Matthias couldn't stop hearing the explosion. Not the sound, the silence after it. The way everything paused for half a second, as if even the sky needed time to understand what it had witnessed. He sat alone in the trench, hands wrapped around a tin cup of cold coffee. His fingers wouldn't stop shaking. Across the line, men laughed weakly, forcing normal life into existence. A laugh in war was never joy. It was denial. Matthias stared into the dark, thinking of the soldier who had stepped off the path. One small mistake, one dead body. Nothing learned, because tomorrow they would send someone else. War repeated itself like a machine. Hagen finally speaks. Boots approached slowly. Matthias didn't look up. He already knew who it was. Hagen Richter sat beside him, close enough to be heard, but far enough to pretend it was coincidence. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then Hagen said something Matthias never expected from him. "You should have died today." Matthias turned his head slightly. Not angry, just tired. "I know," Matthias whispered. Hagen's jaw tightened. "That wasn't an insult." Hagen said quietly, "It was the truth. Men like you don't survive this long." Matthias almost laughed. "Men like me?" he asked. "Men who still feel something." Hagen didn't answer immediately. He stared toward the darkness where the minefield still waited, like a mouth that had tasted blood. Then he spoke. "I used to feel something too." Those words landed heavy, because they meant Hagen wasn't born cold. He had been made cold, like everyone else. The map. Hagen reached into his coat and pulled out something folded. A small paper. A map. Matthias stared at it like it was poison. Hagen kept his voice low. "There's a supply route behind the ridge," he said. "Not guarded at night. If you move before dawn, you can disappear into the forest." Matthias's breath caught. An escape, a real way out. Not survival inside the unit. Survival away from it. Matthias's hands trembled as he took the map. "You're helping me?" he whispered. Hagen's eyes hardened again. "Don't misunderstand," Hagen said. "I'm not saving you because you're good." Matthias frowned. "Then why?" Hagen stared at him for a long time. Then he said the truth in the ugliest way possible. "Because if you stay, they'll kill you, and I'll have to watch it." Matthias swallowed. So it wasn't kindness. It was guilt. But guilt was still human, and human was rare here. The price of running. Matthias looked at the map again. It wasn't just an escape route. It was a choice. If he ran, he lived. But running meant desertion. It meant becoming hunted. It meant leaving the unit without warning. And it meant something else, too. It meant he would be proving the lieutenant right, that he was disloyal, that he was a weakness, and the unit would punish others for it. They would tighten discipline, shoot the next man who hesitated, find another scapegoat. Matthias felt sick. Why was survival always built on someone else's suffering? He looked at Hagen. "What happens to you if they find out?" Matthias asked. Hagen shrugged. "I'll deny it." Matthias's voice lowered. "And if they don't believe you?" Hagen's eyes went empty. "Then it won't matter." That was Hagen's version of fear. Not panic, not shaking, just acceptance. The moment before dawn. Later, Matthias lay in the trench, staring at the sky. The map was pressed inside his coat, warm against his chest like a heartbeat. His mind fought itself. Run, stay, run, stay. If he ran, he saved one life, his own. If he stayed, he might die. But he wouldn't be the reason someone else suffered. Then he remembered the prisoner in the bunker. He remembered the lieutenant's words. "You will not infect my unit with hesitation." Matthias understood then. It didn't matter what he chose. They had already decided what he was. A problem. And problems in war are removed. So maybe running wasn't betrayal. Maybe running was survival. Maybe it was the only resistance he had left. The escape. Before dawn, Matthias rose silently. The trench was half asleep. Men wrapped in blankets like corpses waiting for orders. He moved carefully, stepping over boots, over rifles, over bodies that still breathed. He found Hagen standing near a broken post, watching. Hagen didn't speak. He didn't nod. He just stepped aside. Matthias paused beside him for 1 second. "What if I can't live with this?" Matthias whispered. Hagen didn't look at him. "Then you'll die with it," Hagen answered. Matthias felt the cold truth of those words. Then he walked away, into darkness, into the forest, into uncertainty. Behind him, the trench stayed silent, but he knew the silence wouldn't last. When they discovered he was gone, the consequences would fall on everyone who remained, and Matthias would carry that too, because in war, even escape isn't clean. It's just another form of guilt. Matthias didn't run like a hero. He ran like a man trying to outrun his own grave. The forest swallowed him before sunrise. Tall trees, wet branches, fog thick enough to hide a whole army. He moved fast but quietly, stepping where mud was soft, avoiding stones that could betray him with sound. Behind him, the trench line faded into darkness, but he knew what would happen when they found his bunk empty. They would not call him missing. They would call him a deserter, and deserters were not captured. They were erased. The new war began. By mid-morning, distant barking reached him. Dogs. Matthias froze behind a fallen tree, breath held, heart pounding. The barking grew louder. Then voices, German voices, sharp, angry, searching. He pressed himself into the mud and listened. Spread out. He won't get far. Shoot if you see him. Matthias felt his stomach drop. So the lieutenant didn't just want him dead quietly. He wanted him dead publicly. An example, a warning. He was no longer Matthias. Matthias tore the last visible piece of his uniform insignia off and threw it into the dirt. Rank meant nothing now. Name meant nothing now. He smeared mud across his face, pushed his hair flat, made himself smaller. He wasn't trying to look like a soldier anymore. He was trying to look like nothing, because nothing was the only thing war sometimes ignored. The first shot, a gunshot, cracked through the trees. Not at him, near him. Matthias flinched, then crawled forward slowly, staying low. He reached a small ridge and peered down. 2 German soldiers stood near a clearing, rifles raised. They weren't firing at an enemy. They were firing at a man in civilian clothes. Maybe a farmer, maybe a refugee. Someone who had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Matthias watched the man drop. The soldiers didn't check if he was truly dead. They simply moved on. Matthias understood something sickening. His escape had turned the whole forest into a killing zone. They weren't just hunting him. They were hunting anything that might be him, and innocent people would die for his decision. He felt guilt rise like acid, but he kept moving, because guilt didn't stop bullets. A second enemy. By afternoon, Matthias reached the edge of a road. He thought it might lead him away from German patrols. He was wrong. A convoy approached from the opposite direction. Allied vehicles, different uniforms, different language, same rifles. Matthias stepped back into trees. He tried to stay hidden, but one Allied soldier spotted him. "Hey, stop!" Matthias froze. He didn't understand every word, but he understood the tone. He raised his hands slowly. The Allied soldiers aimed instantly. To them, he wasn't a deserter. He was just a German soldier, and German soldiers were targets. Matthias's mind raced. If he spoke German, they'd shoot. If he moved, they'd shoot. If he stayed, they'd capture him. Or worse. He whispered in broken English, voice shaking, no fight, no shoot." The soldiers hesitated. One stepped forward, suspicious. "You German?" Matthias nodded. "Deserter," he whispered. "No war." A rifle pressed harder into his direction. The soldier's eyes narrowed. Deserter means spy. Matthias felt cold sweat run down his ribs. He had survived the front by refusing to kill. Now he might die anyway, because no one believed a man could refuse. The choice that saved him. An explosion sounded in the distance. German artillery. The Allied soldiers turned their heads for half a second. That half a second was enough. Matthias ran, not toward safety, toward chaos. Bullets snapped through branches behind him. One tore through his sleeve. Another struck a tree inches from his head. He threw himself into a ditch, rolling through wet leaves, heart screaming. The soldiers shouting faded. They didn't chase far, because war always had bigger targets. Matthias stayed in the ditch, shaking violently. Alive. Again. But now he understood. He had no side, no protection, no place where he belonged. To the Germans, he was betrayal. To the Allies, he was enemy. And the world had no category for a man who refused to fire. The night of hunger. That night, Matthias ate roots and half-frozen berries like an animal. He drank muddy water. He shivered under branches, listening for barking, for boots, for engines. Sleep came in broken fragments, and every time he closed his eyes, he saw the prisoner again. He heard the gunshot in the bunker. He felt the lieutenant's voice in his ear. "You will not infect my unit with hesitation." Matthias realized something terrifying, even if no one caught him. The war had already captured him inside his head. The final truth of running. Just before dawn, Matthias found an abandoned hut. He stepped inside, exhausted. On the wall, someone had scratched words into the wood. "Survival is not freedom." Matthias stared at it for a long time. Then he sat down slowly, head in his hands. He had escaped the unit, but he hadn't escaped the consequences. Because survival didn't erase guilt. It only gave guilt more time to grow. Matthias was captured on the third day, not because he made a big mistake, because he got tired. And tired men become visible. It happened near a broken bridge outside a ruined village. Matthias was trying to cross quietly when he heard shouting behind him. Foreign language, fast commands, Allied soldiers. He turned to run, but his ankle slipped on wet stone, and pain shot through him like fire. He fell, rifle gone, hands open. He raised them slowly, a dozen weapons aimed at his chest. He didn't beg. Begging made you weak. Weak men were executed quickly. Instead, he whispered what he had practiced in his head for days. "I don't fight. I don't shoot." They didn't understand, or they didn't believe. They dragged him away anyway. The room that felt like a bunker. The interrogation room was inside a half-destroyed building. A single lamp, a wooden chair, two men in uniforms that meant power. Matthias sat in the chair with rope marks on his wrists. His hands were shaking, not from fear of pain, from fear of being misunderstood. One officer spoke slowly in broken German. "You are German soldier." Matthias nodded. Another officer leaned forward. "Unit? Rank?" Matthias hesitated. If he told the truth, he was deserter. Shot by Germans, hated by Allies. If he lied, he was spy. Shot by Allies. So he said the only honest thing left. "I left." The officer raised an eyebrow. "You left the army?" he asked. Matthias nodded again. "Yes." The room went cold. The second officer laughed once. "Everyone says that when captured." Matthias's throat tightened. "I refused," he whispered. "I refused to fire." Silence. Then the first officer leaned in. "You refused to fire, and you expect us to believe this makes you innocent?" Matthias didn't answer, because innocence didn't exist anymore. Only less guilt and more guilt. The question that destroyed him. The second officer placed a photograph on the table. A village. Dead civilians. Women and children among them. Matthias's stomach dropped. "Was this your unit?" the officer asked. Matthias stared at the photo. His mind screamed, "I didn't do this." But his uniform had done it. His army had done it. And the world didn't separate one soldier from another. Matthias spoke carefully. "I wasn't there." The officer's eyes narrowed. "Maybe not," he said. "But you wore the same coat." Matthias felt something heavy settle inside him. It was the price of belonging to a machine. Even if you refuse one command, the machine still uses your existence as proof. Matthias whispered, "I didn't kill anyone." The officer stared at him. "Did you try to stop anyone?" Matthias froze. That was the real question. Not, did you shoot? But, did you allow others to shoot while you stayed clean? Matthias's breathing became shallow. He remembered the bunker prisoner, the shot, the body dropping. He hadn't pulled the trigger, but someone still died behind him. Matthias lowered his eyes. No, he admitted. The officers didn't look satisfied. They looked proven right. The offer. The first officer leaned back and folded his arms. You want to live? He asked. Matthias looked up slowly. Yes, of course he wanted to live, but not like before. The officer continued. Then help us. Matthias felt cold in his bones. Help? How? The officer slid another paper onto the table. A list of names. German soldiers captured nearby. A supply route. An ammunition point. Information. If you give us details, the officer said, you live. Matthias stared at the list. If he helped, he betrayed his own side. But his side had already tried to kill him. Still, betrayal had weight. It wasn't simple. Matthias whispered, If I help you, more men die. The second officer shrugged. Men die anyway. That sentence sounded too familiar. Matthias had heard Germans say it. Now allies said it too. Different language. Same war. Matthias realized then, the war didn't belong to one nation. It belonged to human brutality itself. The boy outside. Later, they locked Matthias in a small room. No window. Cold floor. A single blanket. From the hall he heard a voice. Young. Frightened. A German accent. A boy. Matthias pressed his ear to the wall. The boy cried quietly. I didn't want to be here. I was forced. Matthias closed his eyes. It sounded like every new recruit he had ever seen. Then the boy shouted, Please, I never shot anyone. Matthias's chest tightened violently. The same words. The same desperation. The same useless truth. Matthias realized the boy was about to be executed anyway. Not for what he did. For what he represented. Matthias stood up, heart racing. This was his final test. Stay silent and live, or speak and risk everything. He stepped to the door and shouted in broken English, He is telling the truth. Silence in the hallway. Then footsteps. An officer opened the door, staring at Matthias. What did you say? Matthias swallowed. He is a boy, Matthias said. He didn't fight. He didn't shoot. The officer's eyes narrowed. And how do you know? Matthias's voice shook. Because he sounds like me. The officer stared for a long time, then closed the door without a word. Matthias collapsed onto the floor. He didn't know if he had saved the boy. He only knew he had refused again, even in captivity, even when it could cost him his life. The truth of his war. That night, Matthias didn't sleep. He stared at darkness and realized the final irony. He had refused to fire to keep his soul. But war had placed him in a world where soul didn't matter. Only sides, only outcomes, only victories built on bodies. Matthias whispered into the darkness, If refusing to kill makes me die, then maybe death is the only honest ending. The dawn came slow, heavy, like it knew the weight it carried. Matthias Krüger sat in the cold, damp cell of the ruined village's makeshift prison. The boy he had defended yesterday slept fitfully on the floor, curled into himself. He was alive, but fragile. Alive because Matthias had risked everything. Outside, footsteps approached. Not soldiers this time, just the faint sound of boots crunching mud, accompanied by the murmur of voices. Matthias's heart hammered. It was the moment of truth. The officer returns. The officer who had captured him stepped in silently, eyes scanning. Matthias, like a predator, measuring the value of a prey that might fight back. You've done enough talking, he said quietly. Now you can prove your loyalty, or you can die. Matthias's lips trembled. I've done nothing wrong, he whispered. The officer smiled thinly. Wrong, right? Those words do not exist here. Only obedience, only action, only consequences. He waved toward the boy. Your friend here is in danger. One shot from you, and he lives. Refuse, and you might live. Maybe. Matthias felt bile rise in his throat. He understood the trap. Shoot. Save the boy. Betray himself. Don't shoot. Keep his conscience. Risk death. He looked at the boy. Pale, trembling, innocent. His decision would decide someone else's fate. A silent debate. Matthias thought back to every order he had refused. The prisoner in the bunker. The enemy soldier in the ruins. Every hesitation. Every step he had taken. Every breath weighed in his chest. The lieutenant's voice echoed in his mind. You will not infect my unit with hesitation. And yet, here, hesitation might save a life. The boy's eyes were wide. Not fear. Hope. Matthias's hands shook. The officer repeated, Decide. The moment. Time slowed. Matthias raised the rifle. A tremor in his hands. A pulse of panic in his ears. He could feel the boy's breath, shallow and steady, counting on him. And then Matthias lowered the rifle. Not toward the boy. Not at the officer. He dropped it to the floor. I will not kill, he said firmly. The room went still. Consequences. The officer's face darkened. He signaled with a slight nod. A soldier stepped forward, rifle aimed. But then Hagen appeared, silently behind the officer, a hand on his arm, voice low and steady. Let him be. He's done what we cannot. The officer froze. Rage, disbelief, calculation in his eyes. But he didn't move. Matthias realized then Hagen had protected him again, not out of mercy, not out of loyalty, out of respect. The escape. Hagen whispered, Go, follow the river, avoid the roads. You might make it. Matthias nodded, stunned. He picked up the boy and left through a back exit. Mud, fog, and broken buildings greeted them. Every step felt surreal, every heartbeat a reminder. Survival was no longer simple. They moved quietly through the ruined village, and as dawn broke fully, the forest swallowed them both. Epilogue. The moral battlefield. Matthias never returned to the unit. He survived. The boy survived. But war had already carved him into a new shape. A man who refused to fire, yet carried the weight of countless deaths he couldn't stop. He had survived physically, but the war within him, the moral war, would never end. And in that truth lay both his freedom and his punishment. Because refusing to kill in a world built on killing was not heroic. It was human. And humanity in war is its own battlefield.